Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I invite you to gather around, come closer to the main stage, wherever you are. You won't regret it. Give a couple of seconds. Don't be shy. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Corner and to the second installment of our panel discussion series put on by BMC Radio, wonderful community platform. And we have what I call a superstar panel to discuss, debate, reason, vibe on a topic that simply put states jazz, the foundation of reggae. My name is Gordon Wedderburn.
And I'm Gillian Wedderburn.
And we are, for want of a better word, moderators for this panel tonight, but I feel we're just sitting amongst contemporaries, peers, like-minded people, vibing on a topic that is important, and I think important to us all on various levels. I am going to ask members of the panel to just introduce themselves, and I'm going to start on my furthest left with Keith.
Good evening, Gordon. Good evening, everybody. My name's Keith Lawrence. I'm a DJ, producer, presenter. I present the Reggae Rock Show on My Soul Radio Wednesday nights, 11 p.m. And I'm honoured to be here amongst esteemed colleagues.
Good evening. Good evening, Gordon. Thanks for inviting us. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Gary Crosby. I'm a double bassist, also an educator, and the artistic director of the Tomorrow's Warriors Company.
Thank you. My name is Richie Maharishi Hi-Fi. I'm a DJ and a radio presenter. I have a show on Crosby Radio. I also promote events, and I've been a lifelong enthusiast for reggae music, Jamaican music, and the influences that go into Jamaican music, which is jazz, dancing, etc., etc.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is John Stevenson. I am a freelance writer, broadcaster with a very long-standing interest in both jazz and reggae. And I'm very grateful to Gillian and Gordon for inviting me along to discuss the topic this evening. Thank you.
I'll speak on behalf of Gillian. Gillian and our DJs, promoters, supporters, facilitators, music lovers, record connector? No, we don't connect that. But we are lovers of music, lovers of reggae, lovers of jazz, lovers of good conversation. And I'm going to stop there for now. That is yes. But I'm going to hand over to Gillian to start the ball rolling.
Well, tonight we're going to be diving into a part of Jamaican music history that is just, it's mentioned, but it is rarely explored in depth. And this is the deep, surprising for some people, and influential relationship between jazz and reggae. Now, when we talk about reggae, most people think about the one-drop rhythm, the bass line, the message, but long before reggae took shape, before rocksteady, before ska, Jamaica had mento, our island's first popular music. And the mento musicians weren't creating in isolation. They were listening to American jazz on shortwave radio. They were hearing swing bands touring the Caribbean and absorbing the harmony, phrasing, and rhythmic ideas of artists like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Louis Jordan. So tonight we're here to uncover these musical worlds, how these musical worlds connect, how jazz filtered through mento, how ska emerged from jazz-trained players, and how those influences still echo through reggae today, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly. And we have a brilliant panel to discuss it. So let's begin. I think we wanted to ask that first question.
Okay. Now, my question is almost simple. John, I'm going to ask you, and I want everybody on the panel to consider it also, because I love your input. Now, for me, why was jazz developed in the UK, in the USA? Why the USA? Why not Jamaica? Why not Guyana? You know? And I think about it, it's just like asking, how come reggae wasn't, invented in America? But, why the USA, in your opinion?
So I can try to answer that question as best I can. One of the things that we have to realize is that jazz developed in Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, particularly in a place called New Orleans in Louisiana. And what we have to realize about that city is that it's the most northern city, you could say, of the Caribbean. Very few people kind of look at it in that way, but that's how I choose to look at it. And the reason for that is that it was a port city, which was very influential in the United States because it was at one time owned by the French or settled by the French. And it became a very powerful port city, attracting people from the Caribbean, from the islands of the Caribbean, attracting people and trade from Latin America, from Mexico, from other parts of the Spanish world, the New World, attracting people from the islands of the Caribbean, but also, interestingly, attracting a lot of emigration from Haiti at the time of the Haitian Revolution or after the Haitian Revolution. So we're seeing all of these different populations within New Orleans, within Louisiana, generally, other parts of the state of Louisiana. And what we're seeing also is a music that Tim and I was just discussing this with a friend just before before we came here as a panel. When we're looking at jazz and we're looking at the people defining jazz, it's not just Congo Square, because people talk about Congo Square and all these slaves that were auctioned off for Congo Square. We're not just talking about Congo Square, and we're not talking about the bordellos and the whorehouses and prostitution, but these are very trite stereotypes about jazz and about the development of the music. We're talking about movements of people. We're talking about musicians who are also involved in the trade union movement, in the dock workers of Louisiana. But they were not just dock workers, they were musicians as well. So when you talk about people like Jelly Roll Morton, he was a dock worker, and he combined his work in the docks with being a musician, right? Now I'm saying all of this to say that we're dealing with something that is very unique and could only be developed or could only have been developed in that city and in that state of Louisiana. Given all these things I'm speaking about, the Haitian connection, the connection with the islanders, the connection with Spanish America, etc., I think it could only have been developed there. To me, it couldn't have been developed in somewhere like Barbados or somewhere like Jamaica by itself. It could only have been developed in New Orleans and the state of Louisiana. So that's my take on it.
I agree with him in terms of it can only be there, or it was only there. But it's because of the multiplicity of these influences. We also forget the Jewish contribution to that music. And the idea that African music, which is 12/8, that had been interpreted by the trains. The trains play a big, the sound of the trains play a big part in this music. What we did, because Africans hearing, we always like ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. We always put that triplet there, and that's apparent. That was the sound of the trains. But a lot of the musicians were hearing this. So, as in Caribbean, where our rhythm is still very kind of da 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 da, they developed the sound of da 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 da, which is more African actually. It's just that they weren't aware of itself. That's what's come out. So it was only there it was going to happen. You need size to, you need various types of places to play that kind of music. Ballrooms, shooting, all of that has to be part of it. It could have only been America. The only other place where it might possibly happen is Brazil. I don't know if that island is big enough, but I know Guadeloupe had a big influence on how people improvised generally. Anyway, Martinique too. Yeah, they had a big influence.
Keith, do you have any
No. No, you know what? I can only talk from like the DJ side of me. There's I'm not a professor, I'm a jazz head, I'm a reggae head still, but I do recognise that jazz had a heavy influence in regards to reggae. And jazz could, just like John was saying, jazz could only be made in America just the same as reggae could only be made in Jamaica. The sunshine, the hardship of the people there, the lifestyle all came into the music still. So, just to answer your question, it's just
Richie, any observation or comments on yourself?
Okay, well, Gordon, when you told me that question, and the first idea in the voice note, you said this afternoon, I thought to myself, that is a brilliant question, because it captures something that we all take for granted, especially when we're in music. It really got me thinking, and I can't talk about it on a technical basis, musical technical basis, which is beautiful to hear this kind of interpretation about the training, but my kind of feeling for it is just that I would have thought America was where, there's a population which is much bigger than all of the islands. So, and as John has said, the intermingling of different groups from various islands. It was like a crossing point for people from all the various parts of the Caribbean and Europe, and as you said, the Jewish kind of influence, Russian Jewish, the Middle Eastern influences of music that came through some of the European influences. But I think I kind of feel my initial response is just in terms of size, wealth, population. There's a bigger society for something like jazz to just spark. And I'm sure obviously there were musics that were being played at exactly the same time in these smaller places where when jazz was developing, but they may have been a lot more insular to the groups.
They would have been folk music. We tend to put John would know, but didn't mention, jazz is the first pop music. It's the first pop music. Prior to that, everything else is either folk music or functional music. But jazz is the first pop music, correct? I Got Rhythm is the first track, is the first pop.
First form of dance music, jazz.
No, you're absolutely right. I just wanted to add to both of your point, the influence of marching bands in New Orleans and in Louisiana generally. So, it was one of the first places where you had lots of people coming together to improvise and to make music together in terms of brass. Lots of people playing trumpets together, playing saxophones together, playing saxophones together, etc., etc. And they were not doing this on their own. The musicians were not just doing this, as a form of to entertain themselves or for dances or whatever. They were also doing it as part of the labor movement, right? So when people had strikes, when people had, were meeting to protest the conditions that they were undergoing, music was an integral part of that, and the marching bands were also an integral part of that as well. So I just wanted to bring that in.
I also remember reading something years ago, but it popped up into my head this afternoon, is that in America, a lot more so than other parts of the Caribbean, drums were actually banned, because of the people that realized that drums were a form of communication. So one of the theories was that jazz, the translation of the syncopation from drums into the instruments, especially the Western instruments, which were then used to play the music that people used to play on the drums. So that was also part of the translation of the rhythmic into these into other instruments.
It's interesting because I resisted the urge to do some research on this question because it was so simple. And listening to the four of you, I now will go home and do some solid research, because as simple a question as it is now becoming profound. I just asked it as a basis to start at jazz, where that was developed. But you've now given me a headache now to do some work. But I'm going to move from that, because I think that question would have established jazz in itself. And I'm going to glide right over to the Caribbean and from that perspective ask about now the impact of what we spoke about being developed in New Orleans and other factors, and how that, for want of a better term, bled into the Caribbean. And again, I'm asking simple questions that I can research, but having such an esteemed panel here just discussing it, and an esteemed audience that I'm sure you'll be thinking, jotting down and getting ready to contribute when the floor opens. say that now. But I'll actually ask you guys. That jazz that was now developed, we're looking at the sort of beginning of the crux of the conversation. How did that jazz bleed into the Caribbean, to Jamaica, to Barbados, and culturally, politically, psychologically, whatever, musically?
Through the radio stations. A lot of it was through the radio stations. New Orleans had some big transmitters. Also, there were bands like the SOS band. Remember the band that came here in the 1890 something. They would have been using musicians from the Caribbean as well. They just needed some black musicians to come to Europe. So it would have started then. There was a guy in Trinidad. There was in New York, Trinidadian guy who was using jazz musicians for Marcus Garvey's type things. It goes back from its very beginnings, its connection.
Lionel Belasco.
In fact, he was the one that, my instrument, it was Lionel Belasco who moved away from the tuba and used the double bass. So there's those kind of connections. And even if you go back to early Duke Ellington's bands, there were Caribbeans in that band. You know, Caravan was written by June Wantiz. Where's he from? Panama? Panama, yeah. Panama too is a big influence on the Caribbean. The Panama Canal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our grandparents went there to work, met new people, and that's how it started to spread out through that southern part of America. Hence why we love knowing this so much. Miami and those places.
It's interesting because you mentioned Louisiana as that hub, bringing people together. The other big hub in the region was actually the Panama Canal. You know, and I won't even go into the Latin side of it because that's opening up another whole different conversation.
I don't think
I have a real issue with this term, Latin side. I don't know how Caesar get involved in this argument. It's the Caribbean. It's Afro-Caribbean.
Cool.
Because it's from Spanish. Of course, we've got to mention the Spanish influence as well. But it's actually, when they talk about Latin music, they're actually talking Afro-Caribbean music. But by using that name, it dissociates itself from, British Caribbean and Black Caribbeans. Cuba is less than 50 miles from where my sister is in Jamaica.
Yeah.
I can actually see that. And see Cuba. Also, a lot of the early Jamaican musicians were of Cuban extraction.
Yes.
A lot of them, Tommy McCook,
Rico, Rodriguez.
Rico. A lot of them have Cuban backgrounds.
I think it's an important point, Gary, because to define the music of various parts of the Caribbean and African diaspora by the nationality of the empire that happened to be controlling it is a bit disingenuous.
Yes.
To say that it's Latin music because of Spanish people, well, no, it's not. It's because of, it's something to do with Spanish, but it's not the way that, it's not the differentiation that we
we tended, me and my friends and my family people, we would say it's Afro-Caribbean music. And if you really speak with a lot of Cubans of African background, they don't use that term Latin. They don't use that term. Because they know what it implies.
That's a European construct.
Of course.
I'm very happy I said it actually, so that this conversation could go.
It's a great way of identifying something, and we can all say we all know exactly what it means. But for those of us who are interested in the history of the Caribbean music, people like Marjorie Wiley and all that, they hit me up to that 30 years ago and said, stop using that term. Why don't we use the term Afro-Caribbean?
Yeah, I also would say, I think it's a lot to do with the backwards and forwards movements between the island and America. So, you know, again, America is always going to be seen as the place that is predominantly African culture. So there's always the smaller places, the satellite places, there's always going to be people that are gravitating towards the bigger country, but there's always going to be a backwards and forwards movement carrying of, you know, the trends of music, of fashion, even everything is going backwards and forwards constantly. And again, the point you made as well, Gabby, is that, you know, let's not forget that the terminology, someone being American, can easily encompass someone being from Jamaica, from Cuba, from, you know, so, and again, you know, a lot of jazz musicians that we know of today, you know, are either from the Caribbean or one generation removed from a Caribbean background. So what is called American now could very easily be one of the other islands' generational progeny.
And the reason why I was attracted to this music is because of its international flavour. And when you speak with a lot of good jazz musicians, we're not interested in background. Can you play the music? And if you look at the history of the music, even back to New Orleans, there have been musicians from all over the world. And even our music in Jamaica. So some people are listening to music and don't realise that it's Australian rhythm section. You know, there were 3 Australians that contributed as much as the Jamaicans did. Those 3, I can't remember the names.
Gray and Goodall.
Oh dear, you're embarrassing. But they were so important to Island Records. When it first started, if you look at all of the early Island Records, it's those 3 guys from Australia.
Greg Goodall was the engineer for Dr. Bird Records at the time. The rock steady vibe.
Yeah, that's right. They became engineers, they became really important to Jamaican music. What I'm trying to imply that this term jazz has always been a universal term. And the majority of the people that supported it were internationalists anyway. If you look at all the early jazz concerts, you'll find a lot of the Communist Party was supporting a lot of this stuff. So you can see the type of thinking of those people who would accept whatever your sexual orientation was, whatever your drugs you were into, it was free for everybody. Nationalism doesn't come into it until the 1950s. That's how I saw it.
Interesting. I just wanted to add a couple of things to your concept of jazz bleeding into reggae. So in my research, what I found out was that
It's not into Jamaican music.
into Jamaican music, sorry. What I found out was that you had 3 principal radio stations from the United States. One was WLAC from Nashville, WINZ or Z from Miami, and WWL from New Orleans. These were the 3 principal radio stations that Jamaicans were getting music from. And you know, it was a variety of different music. It wasn't just jazz, it was R&B, it was soul, it was, you know, a variety of different musics. Also, we should realize that people like Coxsone Dodd and Duke Reed, Coxsone of course from the Downbeat sound system, Duke Reed from the Trojan sound system. These were people who were into jazz. They collected jazz, right? And it would have been fed through their sound systems that they were carrying around, you know, different parts of different localities with. I'm not sure whether many of you know about the Meritone sound system. Yeah, so the Meritone sound system. Yeah, that's right. A very good friend of mine, Monty Blake, who's now sort of one of the sole survivors of Meritone. Meritone was, you know, a sound system where there was lots of jazz being played. It was actually called the Meritone Disco before it became the Meritone sound system. And a lot of the music that they played was jazz. You know, they collected jazz and they played it. And we're talking like in the early 60s there, that this was happening.
Before I continue, Keith,
Hello.
I know you know Meritone. I don't really know the history. Just touch a little more on the history of Baritone.
Baritone, sound system, record label, recorded most of this stuff at Federal, maybe Richie can confirm that still. Done a lot of this stuff at that time, rocksteady wise, and yeah, very integral in the whole period of time, putting out certain tunes that are regarded classics now, still.
The importance of sound system, Richie.
Okay, I mean, I think we jumped forward a little bit because
I'll bring it back, but still on here.
I think it's important to remember and recognise that Jamaican recorded music only started in kind of the mid-50s. So up to the mid-50s, the sole diet for Jamaican musical enthusiasts was foreign music, American music, Caribbean music, and to a certain extent African and pop music as well. So there are generations of, so someone like Cox and Dodd is interesting because somebody of Cox and Dodd's generation and Duke Reid, those guys would have grown up on a diet of jazz, and for them, the music that got invented in the mid-50s and the early 60s, it was like, my comparison is like me thinking about grime now. I kind of think it's irrelevant to me, or I think it's like a kid's music. So there's grown-up people that have been listening to Coleman Hawkins and all of these Ben Websters and all these serious jazz guys from America. And when the little local recordings started happening, for them it was just like kind of a hobby almost, it turned into something a lot bigger, and they jumped on it, they worked it, we blew it. But the original, there was a whole generation of people for whom jazz was the standard music for them to go on, even whilst they were in Jamaica.
They would have been going to clubs, nights out. That's what they would have been listening to, popular music of the time. So, as you said, Louis Jordan, and when we talk jazz, we have to realise that not everybody was listening to Charlie Parker. We don't mean that or Ornette Coleman. There's Louis Jordan. There's you can mention some of the names. I can't think.
Roscoe Gordon,
definitely very important to Jamaican music. Roscoe Gordon. There's another couple names that have slipped me at the moment, but that's what they would have been dancing to. Hence why, when my father came to the first time to see me at a jazz gig, he interpreted it as one balanize. That's how he said, he used that language in front of everybody. One balanize, and you can't answer that. Everybody's looking at me like, how embarrassing. I was like, no, it's just like that. That's how he is. He don't care about whether you're a star or not. They were listening to the popular music of the time, and they were getting it off the radios. Simple as that.
Keith, you're going to say something? Or?
No, I'm just listening to what Gary was saying there. You were talking about the Baganese and how it relates to sound system culture in that regard. I can vouch for that just from my father, who used to be a sound man here in the 60s in the UK. Started off playing sound system in Jamaica. Came from St. Thomas. You told me the story yourself. Came from St. Thomas, went down to Kingston. I met up on a one-count Machuki who asked him, music. And Dad said, yeah, I know music. Play the song now. And Pops didn't play his sound for a while before he came over. Here in the UK, early 60s, settled in Brixton and set up played another sound from that area called Jim Daddy. And Jim Daddy was a man who had a bakery on Acre Lane. This is the 60s and he used to play the sound that time then. And it started off like late 70s, mid 70s, with its own sound, set up, played the blues dances around the area, Brixton, Clapham, etc. And only getting to know, like, from that time then, I didn't grow with him, but he gave me his records when I was 5. He bought me a record player. And like certain tunes like Slim Smith, Time Has Come was in there, Blue Blue, Eric Donaldson. Later on down the years, like I got the last portion of the tunes. And I knew from a long time that Soundman always loved jazz, but kind of confirmed it when I got in and saw certain Hank Crawford LPs in there, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, and realizing that, you know, the man them just loved music. And just like how John, Gary and Richie was saying, at that time there, I could see how those guys would have gravitated to the jazz at the time, being musically minded, coming from the background of mento and calypso, and hearing what was going on in the States at that time. It would just be a natural progression for them to encompass that into their own life, as well as encompassing it into the music that they made, you know?
I would like to say, so it was also a choice. They're artists, so they can, you know, I am the nephew of Ernest Rankin, so I do know a little bit about this.
We're going to touch on that. Don't worry.
He said, if you're in Jamaica, you're trying to get out. as you know, as a working musician, you know, he said, going to Panama with them drums, those were the things that made his life. You know, going to other countries, reading about other countries, and listening to other music all over the world. And I was really surprised. Not surprised, it opened my mind when I spoke to Tommy McCook. And the term, they don't use the term reggae musicians, that generation. Uncle Ernest, Monte Alexander, Sonny Bradshaw, these are people I used to get up and see in the house. They're not jazz, they didn't see themselves as reggae musicians. In fact, I heard Mr. Bradshaw say, "What is that?" That's it. He looked at me in front of everybody and I have to answer. What is a reggae musician? Explain to me exactly what that musician does. So I embarrassed myself in front of my family then. Because I'm coming up with, you know, Augustus, Pablo, and Nambra. And I just said that again. They're more worldly than what people actually give them credit. Right? They're just like anywhere else in the world. They want to discover other styles. You know, they're not just all down in Jamaica. This is our music. This is our music. They're much wider than that. Classical music. We haven't even mentioned the influence of classical music on our music. You know, all of those teachers that would have been teaching were sent from England. They were sent from Della Hall School, which was the military school here. So you'll find all of the best musicians in Jamaica, they were taught by that system that they were teaching down in Middlesex. To prove how even more integrated we are, this song, track, I think it's about just before, while Hitler was getting a bit rough, they commissioned an Englishman to write that song. And the whole of the Caribbean think is this, you know. I think it was for us, it was give me back the money with the lion planet. I can't remember the exact words, and I think every generation they change the actual words, but the rhythm is the same. Da 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 da. It was English light music. It was composed by an Englishman who had never been to the Caribbean.
I was just going to say, Gary, Little John came up with one in the 80s. Now give me that big gal, cause she mod up.
Alright. You know that.
An Englishman whose family is still being paid in, I think it's 200 odd barrels a year of high grade rum from 1930 something. So it's not our music, it's amongst everybody.
There's a fantastic quote from, there's an anecdote from Tommy McCook when they were starting the Scatterlights, and Tommy McCook had already been a seasoned musical professional for quite a few years, and I think he worked for 8 or 10. He worked for a long period out off the island and came back in the early 60s. And when he was asked to join and lead the Scatterlights, he refused because he said, no, I want to carry on being a serious jazz musician.
But this thing is now really opening up a can of worms. Now, I tell you, no, it's interesting, and we're learning as we go on. The whole thing with going back to you, one with classical music being involved, two with that song that you mentioned that we think is indigenously Caribbean or indigenously Jamaican, that one that you hope. I'm listening to you and I'm saying, so hold on. Whence forth the development of mento and calypso, because I think both go hand in hand, mento and calypso. Talk about the rise of that music.
They were considered as pop music at the time. Mento is considered pop music. And I suppose calypso would be the same. They would have maybe an older folk music, I can't think of the name, but they're still considered pop music. If you listen to how those harmonies move, it's not that far from I Got Rhythm. That is the key to all the music you listen to today. That one song, I Got Rhythm, is the key. Obviously, he must have been influenced by something, but how that was projected to the world. This is a new sound. This is called pop music. It's aimed at younger people dancing, so on and so forth.
But do you know why did the music slow down to that sound that we now have as reggae?
Slow down. I'm saying in the 60s, Uncle said when the heat and whatever else kept the musician there, they decided to slow down. And it was that between the ska and the rock setting, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one hot heat wave. One hot heat wave, Uncle said. And it's pure joke, you know, when my family are talking about this music. You have to see between the lines. You understand what was going on. At that time, I think it was 64? 66. Is it 66? 66, where it sort of slows down the rest of it. They were tired. They were tired. They were in the studio, it was hot. And I think his Duke Reed studio, that's what he claims, which was more drinking was going on in that studio, more than studio one, which is something else was going on.
And also,
simple as that,
yeah,
can change.
So that's it. The kind of a mythology about how ska slowed down.
It is a mythology.
And another thing I think that they say is instrumental to that change was the introduction of the electric bass. So up to that point, the Scatterlights, up to about 64, 65, they were still playing stand-up bass. And being able to plug in an electric bass. And I think, they can actually date it to the first time somebody plugged in an electric bass into the studio and recorded with it. They realised that they could play in a different way, and they could play in a way which didn't rely on the forward momentum so much of the drive of a walking bass line, and they could do something else with the music. So
also, the Beatles was around at that time, so that influenced that music as well.
I think it's just generally musicians experimenting with different styles, fast and slow.
We'll never know exactly why these things happened. We just have to accept that they've happened. And we can come up with theories, but whenever I'm down in Jamaica and I'm trying to find out where it started, I always come away exhausted because everybody was in the studio when it was there. The whole island who's involved in music. Everybody I speak to, I always think about like that for everybody. So then you just have to realise that it didn't happen like that. It wasn't one genius that sat down and wrote it. It was, what do they call it? Osmosis? It's a kind of osmosis.
And also we have to remember that the rhythms were very musically complex as well, so they could be slow within the fast and fast within the slow as well, depending on what you wanted to focus on.
Yeah, that's the way you said it. It just reminded me of my dad, fasted in the slow, slowly in the fast. Yeah.
I mean,
according to people I know, it didn't become more complicated, it became more simple. Yeah. That's how they saw it. That's how they saw it.
Well, within the discussions, you basically answered the question, but put so much more meat on the bones. And because of that, I'm gonna move from mentor and calypso and ska to the influence of Rastafari and this thing we call jazz, because I find it fascinating. Before we even go to where I want to go to, when I was young, 7, 8, there's a track that for some reason I just gravitated to it. And I played it earlier, in a circle with Jacob Miller. Standing firm. No, you're not going to do this here. You're not going to do this here. As it was in the 70s, it could be maybe about 5, listen. About 5, 6, yeah. About 5, 6. Could be about that. Or a little over. But it was in a circle standing firm. I don't know if you know the track. And for some reason I was transfixed. I could have learned that verbatim and, learned just the arrangement just stuck with me. And it wasn't until as an adult that I really then connected it to Take 5. That was just euphoria. Yes. And I consider that part of the whole impact of Rasta on the music and how deep we in Jamaica were going with the music. But I want to consider and to talk about Rasta we mentioned some of the people, the Rico Rodriguez, the Roland Alfonso, the Cedric Brooks, who were from the ska era, who were converting to Rastafari and linking up with somebody like Count Basie. And I think that is a period that I'd love to hear the panel talk about. I'm gonna ask Keith to start this from a musical and a record perspective.
Yeah, all right. Like I said, we're about 69, so we never did it,
But you were there.
But I was there. It's
Your collection time.
yeah, for walking at gaps, Rasta and reggae go hand in hand, and the jazz would be the same as well. If we're talking on the spiritual level, which Rasta is, and also jazz, it's kind of to be able to have the two of them would be in the likes of Count Basie and Cedric and Brooks. I mean, in that regards, Clement Dodd was more open to bringing Rasta into Studio One as opposed to the other studios who frowned upon Rastafari at that time there.
That's interesting.
Very much so. I mean, like, it was this thing where Rasta would lose their life because of the way they looked. They were considered black heart man, as my grand told me still, or they take away your picnic there. Basically, that's how Rasta was revered. So in that regards, when Mr. Dodd opened the door to the Rasta man, it was, a revelation. If because one of his LPs was like Mystic Revelation.
Yeah, Mystic Revelation of
Rastafari.
But that is Cedric Brooks's idea. He was hired as the arranger for that particular thing. That's not to say compas is not important to jazz, because in 60 something, when Ellington was down there, he went up to Orica Hill. I know people that were up there, and it wasn't anything unusual for them to have the guy from Take Flight. What was his name? Dave Brubeck. Dave Brubeck had been there. You know, they used to do these American tours. So there are many other names that have been there. So
Louis Armstrong.
But that connection between Rasta and jazz is mainly, according to who I've spoken to, is the fact that those guys could go up to Warwick and spend time playing and participating in cultural activities. Yeah. Compas was more open than, say, Joe Creed, who, would carry a gun and he's running a business as well. No time for people sitting around, discovering the meaning of life and all that kind of thing. That's what was happening up at Warwick, so that connection tightens it even more.
Why were they converting to Rastafarians? The musicians mentioned were coming out of an established institution, and I bring it up now, of Alpha Boys School. So they were coming they were trained there, coming from that institution,
Yes.
which was by and large a Catholic institution.
Yes, but not all of them were Rasta. If you speak Mr. McCook and them, they're not considering themselves Rasta. They may sympathize.
Mm-hmm.
They may sympathize, but they wouldn't consider themselves as Rasta. Even Cedric Brooks, to a degree, I think he should be looked upon as maybe a black nationalist or somebody who's involved in that.
So it's more a socio-political.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think we need to look, sorry Richie, but I think we need to look at the sort of socio-political context of Jamaica at that time, and look at the divisions within society, look at the huge inequalities that were existing in Jamaica and probably still exist today. When we look at the fact that Hugh Shearer, who was the Prime Minister, I believe, at that time, was very, very opposed to Rasta. He was responsible for Walter Rodney being expelled from Jamaica because Walter Rodney was among those people who were rounding with the brothers, rounding with the Rastafari community. So we need to look at Jamaican society at that time as being a very anti-black society in a sense. This was a society that banned books from black authors in America. Malcolm X's autobiography was banned in Jamaica during that time. So I think what I'm saying is that those musicians who converted in a sense to Rastafari were doing so against incredible odds. They were cutting against the grain of their society, which was incredibly conservative, very reactionary, very anti-black.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit simplistic to just twin Rastafarianism with jazz musicians. As Steve has just said, John, it's a much more of a socio-political movement. It's a rebellion as such, a stance, very much rooted in the Black Power ideas that were prevalent at the time, coming again from America and elsewhere, and from Cuba as well, in terms of anti-capitalism and anti-establishment materialism. That's a count. Oh, yeah, Country Clinton, so that's it. But I'm glad you touched on that. There's a classical photo of Duke Ellington with Count Ossie you know, up at the camp. And, you know, there's a great sort of similar photo, but nothing to do with Australia, but Fats Domino with Duke Reed, but it kind of gives you the kind of axis of where the different people placed themselves and where they saw themselves in society. And another interesting thing about Cedric King Brooks, again, I think he actually he went and played with Sun Ra for a while in Philadelphia, you know,
in Chicago.
So again,
Most definitely.
in Chicago, yeah.
But what we're missing out though, there are Ken McIntyre, there are a few other Jamaicans who left in the 50s and went to Chicago and helped develop the free jazz thing. There's about 5 or 6 of them that if they had stayed in Jamaica, they would have been part of the 60s, 70s instrumental sort of music. McIntyre, I can't think of who else. There's quite a few of them are of Jamaican background.
Is this Kala Parish?
Yes,
Yeah.
Maharishi. Yeah. That's it.
Based on what you're saying, I'm gonna use it as a segue. In terms of the socio-political situation going on in Jamaica, and as you say, the musicians not exactly converting to Rastafarianism, but the anti what was happening. Can I now say that that thought process is something that has transferred into reggae, and reggae then being that sort of anti-system thing? Because I'm listening to you now, and I'm going back
They
into
were
my
called-
recesses.
Dad would call him beard man. Man who used to be a beard.
Yes.
They would kind of agree with the rest of principles and all that, but they weren't rest as such.
Yes.
But they had a big influence on this instrumental reggae stuff that we had.
Toots called himself a beardsman, didn't he?
Quite a few of them, you know, Bob Andy and all of them.
Yeah, okay, wrong.
Beard man.
So that thinking then was part of, again, that reggae philosophy that grew and made reggae into what it is, that sort of thinking coming from that side.
I think as the years went on and the musicians and the artists became more confident in expressing what they really wanted to put out as a message in response to pressures of society, as things were worsening in terms of financial and economic scenarios, people were feeling more, you know, they felt the need to speak openly about what they felt was an appropriate response. And also the information was coming more as well. So people were researching more about, you know, the systems that put them there and the alternative systems that are available, and even looking back at, you know, to Africa for the, you know, in terms of the independence of the country in Africa, as that being a boost, you know, a
Yes.
psychological boost.
What we mustn't forget though is that popularism can affect everybody.
Mm.
And if I look at all of those guys prior to Bob Marley's success, the Cedric Brooks, Nambo, help me out here, Clancy Echoes, whenever they said something that was political, it was involved in what was happening in that country at the time. There was songs about why is black man suffering in the world, but after the Bob Marley success, everybody became black nationalists, every singer. And I know some of these people, they don't give a damn about that. It's populism, they were making money. Some of them are not sort of people you want around you, you invite them to your house. But they're singing that kind of language, they're putting on the dreadlocks, the red, gold and green. It doesn't mean anything. We mustn't take it that everybody in Jamaica was sitting down reading Marcus Garvey's book and all that. Half of them didn't know anything about it. They knew Garvey, and they knew what he was saying, but they didn't take the time to read it. It's Bob Marley's success forced every performer at that time, well, this is the way we got to carry on. You know, this is the way we have to adopt this. But if you check out a lot of them and you check their lives, no, you ain't, if they was to come on and ask your daughter for it, and you'd be scared. It's not going to be realistic. Let's be realistic. Not half of them is not Rasta at all.
There you go. Why? We haven't even scratched the surface of this thing yet. But I want to ask one more question. I want to ask one more question before we open the floor and take questions and reason and vibe. I want to take it to here in the UK. And I'm trying to frame the question. But how can I say it? Is there a situation, or is there the situation that jazz, and especially from Caribbean people abroad who came over to the UK, would they have had any hand, any influence in framing what UK reggae is? Is there a sort of parallel movement? I mean, I'm trying to frame the question, but I don't think it's coming out as I want it to go.
We know in the 40s there was the Caribbean, what's it called, the All Caribbean Jazz Band by
Yes.
a man called Leslie Thompson.
Yes.
Everybody should check out this guy, an old Jamaican guy. I think he was in Nella Hall. I think he was taught in Nella Hall. He is the thread that comes from 1920s through to us today. Leslie Thompson, I think he died in Manchester. He gave up music and went to work in the prison services in the 50s. Yes, there's that connection. But most of the young people that were around me, they wouldn't even know.
I've never heard of it.
You know? Eh?
I've never heard of it.
There's a book out. There's a book released. And then there's a black female singer who's still around today called Elaine Delmar. Her father was band leader, but I forget what was her father's name. Jack Hutchison. Yes, not the dancer one, the one who played the trumpet. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's right. There are actually 3 Jack Hutchisons, you know that?
3?
There was actually a piano player as well called Jack Hutchison. It's almost like they set that name up for us so we could fail, because the original Elaine DeMar's father is a great trumpeter, a great arranger, proper Jamaican hardcore, where the others are kind of hustler type people. I wish I could go there. Elaine DeMar.
Gordon,
Yes.
I think something that we kind of need to touch on a little bit is about you mentioned Alpha earlier, but there's a lot of musicians that came from Jamaica straight to the UK that bypassed reggae, that maybe doesn't feed into answer your question about if they influence reggae in the UK, but it's still an important aspect to talk about in terms of people like Joe Harriet, you know, people that went directly from from Jamaica straight to America and recorded, people like Dizzy Reese, you know, again,
Rico Rodriguez.
Dizzy came here
Yes,
first.
he did.
They all came with Sonny Bradshaw 7.
Okay.
There was a band that came here in the 60s called Sonny Bradshaw. No, it would have been the 50s, sorry. Sonny Bradshaw 7. They were called the Sonny Bradshaw 7 in Jamaica. And when they came, they all jumped ship. That's how you get Joe Harriet. He was from Sonny Bradshaw's band.
And it's interesting to sort of think a little bit, you know, we kind of forget about the UK sometimes, but You know, there's a parallel, absolutely interesting scene to sort of think about hand in hand with what we're talking about today is the post-World War II jazz scene in Soho, you know, which again collected a lot of international musicians and people from around the world, including Jamaica, including Africa, you know, Yolanda, Ambrose Campbell. There's a beautiful sort of album of Prince Buster where he's dressed in the African robes, and when you see the full photo shoot, Ambrose Campbell is in the background. You know, so again, there's another sort of dimension we can't forget about how Caribbean musicians came to the UK. Maybe didn't play reggae as we know it, but still were the firmament of the scene.
They would have been called to do the sessions. I know Joe Harriott was on some of Prince Buster's sessions that they recorded here. Joe Harriott was apparently on some of those.
We shouldn't also forget Eddie Tantan Thornton, who came out of Alpha. He came out of Alpha and came to this country and has been pretty much the backbone of a lot of the reggae that's come out of this country and the jazz coming out of this country as well. So.
I'm going to open the floor because we didn't talk about earlier on, but I'm going to open the floor because one, time is against us, and two, I'd love to hear from the floor because I know that you all, one, have something to say, and two, it is a conversation. You're all knowledgeable people. You've listened to the conversation, and I know there are a lot of gaps in the conversation, but the conversation nonetheless is very enlightening. So at this point in time, we're taking questions from anybody, questions, observations, comments.
How do you know anything about how the church Could somebody tell me a little bit about how the churches in Jamaica, the music, if it had an influence on maybe the Rastafari movement, the way they would adapt their songs, or reggae music, how they would adapt their songs? Was the church an influence in some way in Jamaica?
The Rasta kind of rhythm is really Pocabina,
Right.
which would obviously be related to what being played in the church, but that's as far as it goes.
Right. I'm always thinking about that. I'm thinking, has that been forgotten in some way? And I'm glad you said Pocomania, because that sort of area never gets sort of spoken about. And I'm trying to.
These are the ethnic musics of Jamaica, but
Right.
it influenced everybody.
Yeah.
Whether it is Rasta or
Right.
Afro,
Right.
So, of course.
Sorry to cut you, Gary, but the only other reason why I did ask that question because you guys have spoken about mentor music being such an important part of it. But I've always come across when I've met those elders, you know, like Owen Gray and whatever, and I've tried to romance and bring in the thing about mentor, and they're like, it had nothing to do with it.
Well, I can see from, say, somebody's point of view, if you're not an ethnomusicologist, you wouldn't see that connection.
Right.
You're just a young man on the street,
Yeah.
listening to what you've possibly never been to a mentor session or anything.
Right.
Especially if you're in Kingston,
Yeah.
you might not hear it.
Yeah.
So that's, we're arguing from a point of view of, well, he's an historian,
Right.
so he would see it much different from, say, Mr. Gray would see it.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
and again with the sort of what as we now classify the Windrush generations coming over with their memories of what was going on in the 50s. It's only now that I would probably ask the question to my mum, what was happening when you were there, you know? And 9 times out of 10, I like the way you guys spoke about the big influence on American music and early jazz and whatever. But could somebody sort of more explore about the idea of what the sound systems were actually playing at that time, to sort of, because I always get the impression when I go to a sound system dance or whatever, it's not necessarily about the genre, it's about how the selectors can make you feel one genre could be another genre, could be another genre. Because we could be playing calypso music in a dancing session, but when you dropped it in the dance, you've got all these reggae people that, yeah man, that right man, that woman right man. So is that something that...
The Louis Jordan approach to music?
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest influences
Right.
on our people's music. People don't get, I'm not that old, I can't remember them, but I've heard these names spoken about before. That R&B sound,
Right, yeah.
is the boogie woogie, actually, the rightful term for it.
Perfect.
How I see it and how I hear it is possibly closer than the jazz is to where we are today.
Thank you.
Right? That's how I saw it. And that's how, when I speak to some of the elder musicians, I gather that Ernest Ranglin, Woodjazz, and Joe Harriet, it's not the same as music in Mr. Brooks, what's the trumpeter? Dizzy Johnny. It's a slight, Mr. Moore, and even Tantan is a slightly different approach. They're not really jazz musicians, they like the music. But it's not like they put a career playing jazz. Look, that's what I find. And that's how I've come to peace with it myself. Is how did this music start? Where did it start? Who belongs in it? Who's actually contributing? And what you find is that R&B sound is as important as, say, Charlie Parker. You're not going to turn Charlie Parker into a dancer. I've never heard it. I've never heard it in Charlie Parker being, what do they call it? A DJ sample. You're not hearing that. I think Steve Coleman did it. Steve Coleman did a Charlie
My
Parker.
mum always told me that Fats Dominoes was her favourite artist.
Those are the guys.
In the 50s, that time that all the boogie R&B artists from America, they were running Jamaica.
There's one Charlie Parker tune that people do play. It's called My Sweet Shoes. Okay.
That's a calypso.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There you go.
The bebop music of the 40s, if you listen, which I do, and I'm certain John has, there's a whole heap of calypso in that song.
Sure.
Yeah, a whole heap of calypso. Barbados, calypso. I can name hundreds of songs where I can actually hear it. It was influenced by that guy from, what's his name? You mentioned him earlier, the Trinidadian chap.
That's good.
Yes. Yeah.
The Trinidad, the way they call it, so for me, over the years has become just so increasingly significant in the music, because as I said, you hear it from Mento. I think Calypso moved almost in tandem with Mento, and is an important part shaping Jamaican and the Caribbean music, and it leads me to ask the question, which should be a final question, and anybody can take it. I know you're waiting. Is what we're listening to now, from which jazz is the foundation of, is it now so far removed that the DNA strands of jazz is not seen in it anymore, not heard in it anymore? Whether it be soca, whether it be reggae, whether it be dancehall, is the music now so far removed from that time when the rhythm and blues and the jazz and the big band, was influencing the thing to now in its evolution? Or can we see any connections from now to the past? All the time. Take up your mic now.
can always see the connections. I don't think it's ever weak in those of us who are aware.
Yeah, I think it's a continuum.
Yeah.
So you're getting bits of the past into the present, into the future.
Until one bit of machinery comes in, right? The drum machine. That's the end. That's it. What we're doing and what we obviously we're trying to define what jazz music is. It's all African music. And it's just different parts of the world have added in different bits.
You know what? A friend of mine said as well. Yeah, a friend was saying the same thing. All of it's accurate, it just depends where you put the beat. You know what I mean?
We used to do experiments amongst ourselves, me and my brothers and all that, and we take a classical piece of music and we try and reggae-fy it, or we try and jazz it, and each time we knew how to do it, we just wait. And actually, Rockfort Rock. Everybody knows that melody?
Yeah.
That ain't it at all. It's it comes from yeah, it's not even Comanche, but they teeth it as well. It's a Jewish song. It's an old Jewish song. What was that famous film? Fiddler on the Roof. And if you go through Fiddler on the Roof, you'll find all of them hardcore studio one. Sweet and Easy, you'd find all of those hardcore studio one bass lines. It comes from Jewish music. Our music is international. You know, and of course we want to take claim of it, but we want the whole world to realize they are part of this too.
The Jewish music, you have to remember, comes from the Middle East as well.
Yeah, we're forgetting the Indian influence on our music too, you know. The term raga is so again, that thing that we were speaking about all the radicals in the 70s. Yeah, right. We're not going to hide this because ganja is a big part of it. It comes from India. It was the Indian workers that came in the 19th century that introduced that. The whole concept of Rasta is very much influenced by Indian Buddhism. Hindus.
But more knowledge.
You were gonna say something. My apologies for interjecting now.
No problem. I just want to, Gary used the term thread, and I just want to bring the thread back to what John had said about the migration of Africans from Haiti with French plantation owners who ended up in Louisiana. And I've actually found a book, Creole Music in the Caribbean. Tom Cowley is the author, which actually posits that jazz, as we interpret it, wasn't only from New Orleans. There was a heavy scene in Martinique, which ended up in Paris, in what were called the Bal Negre. So these were clubs, music halls, in the early 20th century, in Paris, which were playing what we would term jazz. And if we think in terms of the movement of people, if you've got people going from Haiti, African people going from Haiti to Louisiana, think of all the movements of people that have been in the Caribbean region alone, and think of the diversity of sound that has been created through that particular happening.
Excellent point.
Excellent point indeed.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to commend everybody. This is really nice talk. I appreciate you all having this. Just even to touch on this point, and even the fact of jazz being an African expressive music, because we have to remember that the entire Caribbean, the entire Americas were plantation societies. So what happens with regards to, and we should consider this, whereas throughout the Caribbean, especially from Barbados coming on, you had this continued flow of African culture towards parts of the Caribbean. What happened, especially in the American South, you're talking about 4, 5, 6, 7 generations removed, which has got to show that we're talking about simplifying the African South in terms of what happened with jazz. So it's something we have to really consider in terms of whatever we determine jazz. And I hold on to what Duke Ellington says with regards to jazz. He said before jazz came to the Americas, it came by the West Indies. And I'm always concerned of the romanticization of America, of mainland America, because of this African expression throughout, from the various parts of the Caribbean and so on. And then just maybe my last point, actually, maybe I look at jazz coming into the UK and France as a coming together of all the sources. You can see it within the scene. Within the scene, we talk about, because the Caribbean, you saw disbursement of and creolization and all that kind of stuff. But within the scenes, now you start seeing the African element here. You start seeing, you have the European element, you have the Caribbean element and all that. And so, I think to the question where you were saying how far away has the music gone with regards, I don't think we're going anywhere far. I think everybody's kind of searching for their roots. And I think maybe we're actually getting in the direction where the music is actually coming back to what maybe this African improvisatory connection has come back to. And maybe we should be looking at it from a different lens in that sense. Thanks.
There's an interesting point I make sometimes with my friend Peter, actually. And when we talk about, how the jazz started in America, etc., so the reverse question of that is, how comes jazz didn't start in Africa? Or why didn't reggae get created in Africa? So, there's something about the location and the mixing which is particular to that, that phenomenon that's created
Circumstances and lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's important to note too that the Caribbean, as we know it, is the source of globalization. That's where globalization actually started. Because you have the Dutch, you have the Spanish, the French, the English, everybody was in that region. And the Africans, of course, people from Africa. And it's created something that to me is very unique, that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. All the cultural products that have come out of the Caribbean, whether it's our language, whether it's music, whether it's different aspects of culture, it's because of globalization, which started right there.
A powerful point on which to close. You live with that, I didn't even realize it until you said that the Caribbean is the fulcrum of globalization.
In the modern era.
I'm very serious now. But you know what? We've been here over an hour, Rory, hour and a half, and we've had some really insightful conversation. And I don't even think we scratched the surface on yet.
Do it again.
I would, because it's so many things have come out of this conversation. I'm a much more learned man. I'm sure you're much more learned today.
Yes.
Yes. And I think we've all sat here, whether on the panel or in the audience like yourself, and actually benefited immensely from this conversation. I think people will go away with more conversation, and I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for being here. I said I was going to do it before, and I'm going to do it now. And I just want to give our flowers to every single panelist here. We've been blessed to say, we've been friends and we've benefited directly from your wisdom. From Keith as one of the best DJs I know, producers, label heads. I played his music in a short set this evening, and obviously I respect Keith, because what you do is important.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the recognition, bro. Thanks.
Gary, yes, man. I just want to say thanks. And again, flowers in abundance, because what you have contributed to music and culture in this country, like Keith, is immense and significant and far-reaching into generations. So thank you. Richie, Reggie, as you said, it's like we know each other a long time, but I've seen what you do and how important it is that you do, because you have put me on to a side of Jamaican music that I didn't even consider. And that is years of passion, of delving deeply into a culture that the average person in Jamaica can scratch the surface. So you have, in your own way, blessed us with knowledge of our own culture. And for that, we are grateful. John, that our life would have actually have been fellow students on campus. I would be the idle one, you would be the serious one. But I've known you for a while. We broke bread together, sit down, eat food, and talk about life and culture, music, and and every conversation that we've had is an upliftment for me. I know Gillian feels the same way. And continue to do what you do. Continue to glean that history, to preserve that history, and to disseminate that history when it is needed, like tonight, so that we can all be fed and watered with knowledge. Continue to love the music, continue to love the culture. Because when we have the conversation, when we sit down in a Brixton and eat a curry and drink a red stripe beer, the conversation is much more enriching. And, again, I think we're blessed to be able to sit with our heroes. Our heroes. Because the hero is not the hero here. The heroes walk among us. The heroes enrich our lives. The heroes make the next day, this minute, this second, that much better. And it makes us want to go on. And that is exactly what happened tonight. Listening to Keith, listening to Gary, listening to Richie, listening to yourself has now given me that thirst for knowledge. And I know a little bit, but there's so much more that I need to learn, that we need to learn. So, flowers in abundance. Thank you very much. I don't know if Gillian wants to say anything. But I have to
thank you for being on the tour. Yeah.
Well, I think we only choose the topic. I think we have to thank Rory here for setting it up. So Rory, big up yourself. I have to thank you guys also because you know what? It shows that we all, and I look out and I see knowledgeable people. People who have passion, who have knowledge for this topic, and I think music and culture in general, people who are practitioners of this music and culture thing, which is what everybody here, we are all practitioners. We're not theorists. We live it. It feeds us. It is our living, just like you out there. And for us to be able to convene like this and talk about this thing, talk about this culture, talk about this jazz, talk about this reggae, even though it scratched the surface, is a real blessing. So thank you for being here, all of you. I'm thinking of maybe doing this again, because as I said,
Yes.
you know, we need to talk more. There are certain things, certain questions that I didn't get to ask. But I love the conversation flowing. And I am going to stop talking now. So,
And we thank you. Thank you. We forgot to mention the importance of the Chinese.
and look at that.
One of the most important group of people in our music. in the whole
Yes.
They were the ones that recorded.
Yes. So we didn't even scratch the surface yet. So we might have to do this again, you know. We might have to do this again, and it will be just. We just continue the conversation and talk about the Chinese and
Lebanese.
Syria. You know, if I don't stop this, we're not going home. Because if you notice, I'm trying to cut it off at the moment. So, thank you. God bless you all.